Thank you everyone for joining us here today at the County Administration Center. We're here to announce a bold set of new racial justice and law enforcement realignment policies for the County of San Diego. Our announcement today includes 3 specific policy changes that will be brought to the Board of Supervisors for a vote on Tuesday, June 23rd. The reality is it is a time for change. I stand with the members of our community who have marched, who have advocated, who have demanded progress. The actions that we're proposing are a step, and they are a positive step in the right direction, but they are only one step that needs to be taken on the long path to substantively address the issues of systemic racism that have been a part of our country for hundreds of years. I hope on Tuesday my colleagues will join us in supporting these efforts. We need to show the community that we hear them, we understand, we recognize, and we acknowledge the problem is real. But recognizing and acknowledging the problem is real is not the same as actually changing things to address it. And what we are doing here is taking a step to make change. And these actions represent the first step that needs to be taken. But before I walk through the 3 things we're introducing, I want to acknowledge the significance of today's date. Every year on June 19th, we observe Juneteenth. It's the day that is symbolically associated with the commemoration of the end of slavery, which was our country's original sin, the deepest wound in our nation's history and one that we have never reconciled or substantively addressed. But it was June 19th, 1865, 155 years ago today, that more than 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation and many months after the Confederate Army had surrendered, on this date, slaves in Texas were told the war was over and they were free. Now, it wasn't until the end of 1865 we ratified the 13th Amendment, which made it a part of our Constitution. But the reality is that although our nation ended the statutory ownership of black souls more than 150 years ago, we never truly reconciled the impact or implications of something that was baked into the founding of our country. The vestiges of this history remain present in our society today. You see them clearly manifested in the indisputable inequities for black Americans in housing, access to capital, business ownership, quality of local schools, quality of air and water, access to parks, and of course the issue the entire nation has been focused on in the preceding month, racial injustice in our criminal justice system and policing policies. And we're standing here today on this date to take a step forward together to tackle some, but certainly not all of these problems. And we stand here today at the County Administration Center, the same place that members of our community and members of the Black Lives Movement stood together in a peaceful vigil, calling on institutional and structural change. The site where people rallied and they cried out for justice. The building where the words are inscribed, the noblest motive is the public good. And it's time for us to live up to that charge. On Tuesday, June 23rd, the Board of Supervisors will consider the 3 proposals that are part of our racial justice and law enforcement realignment. That includes 3 changes. 1, provide more citizen and oversight and independent oversight of county law enforcement by strengthening the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board. Number 2, redirect mental health and homeless calls for help to trained clinicians, not law enforcement. And 3, establish a new Office of Equity and Racial Justice at the County of San Diego to ensure that enterprise-wide, all aspects of county government are thinking about and being forced to confront issues of equity and racial justice. The calls for change that we're making are not new. And the people that are here with us did not just arrive at this situation or this issue. Our community has been crying out for this change for decades and decades. What is new is an increased awareness of the problem, an increased focus on the need that it must be addressed now. And I want to thank the members of the community who have provided us input and guidance as we shaped these policies, who have spent countless hours with us about the change that they need to see. And in many ways, I stand here today merely as their elected representative, pushing for the change that the community wants. I am a white man, and the simple reality is I cannot speak to the experience of being black in America. I rely heavily on the folks behind me and many more to help shape and understand the lived experiences, the voices, the expertise, to craft the policies that, again, I bring forward at their suggestion, at their request, standing together as an ally. As white people, that's what we need to do. We need to lift up and empower people of color. We need to listen. We need to stand alongside. Often we need to stand behind. But we need to understand that every single person has an obligation and a role to be a part of tackling injustice, inequity, and confronting and calling for the systemic change that we need. And I want to thank not only those who are here with us, who you're going to hear from today, but I want to thank Armand King with Paving Great Futures, Christy Hill with the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties, Al Abdullah with the Urban League, Buki, who you're going to hear from in a minute, Ellen Nash, who's here, Layla Aziz, Khalid, so many others who joined with us in this effort in calling for change and helping us shape these policies. I want to thank Donna DeBerry, advocating for black businesses, the voices of our youth who are using their voice in a creative way to uplift the need for change to bring us to the three policies. I will quickly go through the three and then we'll hear from our other speakers. The first is changes to Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board. This is a county board established in the 90s, made up of community members who have the authority to investigate misconduct by the San Diego County Sheriff and probation departments. What we need to do is ensure their independence and expand their authority. And that is what our measure we're bringing forward do, is to make sure that we are holding accountable in an independent way any abuses of power, any actions that are not consistent with justice. And so with our changes to our policy, we will be increasing CLRB's independence from the county and giving them the authority to automatically investigate a number of things. Right now, CLRB can only investigate a citizen complaint on an issue, and then they have the authority to investigate an in-custody death. We are proposing and changing that CLRB needs to have the authority to investigate every single use of force that involves a discharge of a firearm. They need to automatically have the authority to ensure they review every single use of force that results in great bodily injury. We need to ensure they have the authority to automatically investigate any use of force at a First Amendment protest or protected speech event. We need to make sure that the process for selecting CLRB is more transparent, it is more open, there is more community input into who sits on it. We need to move the staffing of CLRB out of the public safety group into the finance and government group to ensure that they are truly independent, and we need to increase their funding to ensure that they have the investigators and the staffing they need to fulfill the mission and charge of true, independent, citizen-led oversight. They already have subpoena power. There's some things that they already have, but we need to take what we have and make it stronger and better. The second policy change is creating an Office of Equity and Racial Justice in the County of San Diego, centering the approach on race when looking at county government policies. Budget deliberations, contracting, and services will ensure that race is not a determining factor in opportunities of access, and that race does not present additional obstacles in accessing health, safety, and well-being for the residents of San Diego County. This office will involve communities of color in setting policies and budget priorities, secure funding and administer restorative justice programs, work to dismantle systematic barriers that present obstacles based on race. They will also be tasked with the full implementation of the recently approved Human Relations Commission, and will constantly look for how do we infuse thinking of equity and race relations into everything that we do here at the county. The third policy is the creation of a countywide mobile crisis response team without law enforcement. The simple reality is in 2018 in San Diego County, law enforcement responded to over 54,000 mental health related calls. That's over 150 calls a day throughout our region. The other reality is people with untreated mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed during a police encounter than a civilian without a mental health illness stopped by law enforcement. This gets further complicated for race, ethnicity, gender, sexual minorities who often suffer from poor mental health outcomes due to multiple factors, including a lack of access to preventive mental health care services, cultural stigmas around mental health, discrimination, and overall awareness about mental health. And all of these factors have been studied and researched in depth by the American Psychiatric Association. According to the 2016 report by the U.S. Department of Justice, black people with mental health conditions, particularly schizophrenia, bipolar, and other psychosis, are more likely to be incarcerated than individuals with the same conditions who are not black. The fact is, law enforcement is not the appropriate response to someone experiencing a mental health or substance use crisis. Instead of law enforcement, it should be trained clinical professionals responding to the situation. Law enforcement's presence often escalates the situation, particularly if that individual has been justice involved. It can heighten anxiety, and it is not the most appropriate use of the time and resource of law enforcement, nor does it get us the best outcome. This policy change will implement county-wide mobile crisis response teams without law enforcement. We'll create a helpline to request mobile crisis response teams, so the only way to get help is not to call 911. We want to provide another venue where you can call and actually have someone come show up and help you. We have a mental health crisis line right now, and if you call, a really wonderful person will talk to you in a very calm, soothing voice. But no one's coming out to help you. The only way you can have someone come help a situation is to call 911. And if the individual is not a danger to themselves or someone else, it ought not be law enforcement. It ought to be a trained clinician who has the experience, the empathy, the compassion, the time, the patience, the knowledge to ensure that that situation gets de-escalated and you get connected to service. We'll also have to launch an outreach campaign to educate community members about how to access these services. And we are going to dedicate an initial $10 million in the Health and Human Services budget to begin to get this process moving, and then work with law enforcement, 911 dispatchers, and other to offload those calls. These are the three proposals we'll be bringing forward next week, and I believe that it is my duty and obligation as a representative, as a white man, as an ally, to stand up and speak and do something. It's people that look like me that have to change attitudes and impressions, that have to talk openly about privilege and about the realities of what life is like in America for people of color. There's a promise in America that there is supposed to be an equality of access to the American dream, but you can't have equality of access to the American dream when you have such rampant inequities throughout our society. And we have to begin to tackle them. And I choose to put the privilege that I have to work on the side of justice and on the side of a better future. These proposals are initial steps to move forward. I believe Black Lives Matter, and I believe it's not enough just to say it. You have to do something and show with your policies and your proposals that you're willing to make a change to try and achieve it. In particular, I am incredibly honored to be here today with some tremendous leaders, again, who have been working on these issues for their entire lives. And I commend them for the work that they've done, and I stand an ally with them as we're now in a position to begin to move forward on some of these issues, and I'd like you to have a chance to hear from them. First up, from the Racial Justice Coalition, it's a great honor to welcome Buki Domingos to share with you a little bit about these proposals and her thoughts. Buki?
Good morning, everyone. I will leave my mask on, and my name is Buki Domingos, founder of the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego. We have been working for 3 years on the I Can't Breathe campaign, and that was to ban all neck restraints in San Diego and its counties. This passed some 2 weeks ago, but we are not satisfied. We will not be appeased with small concessions. That is what we call it. And we will not be fooled by the system that we live in. And this system continues to be a racist system. We are also in favor of a race and equity office, but also the importance of that office is not to have people in that office that have a lot of conflicts of interest. We want people in that office that look like us, that bring our life experiences with them to that office to better address the community. We have trained professionals in our community, and they're also capable of doing that work. The I Can't Breathe campaign is going to the state level, and the name of that bill is AB 1196. We continue to encourage everyone to support that bill. And as we move forward together as a community, that our voices will not be silenced, and this will not just be another period of demos, rallies, and riots. This will truly be a period of change in the history of the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Buki. Next we have up from BayPAC, my good friend and a longtime advocate in District 4 and throughout San Diego, Ms. Ellen Nash.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am honored to represent on Juneteenth the commemoration of the end of slavery in the United States and the United States. And I'm here because hundreds and thousands of protesters nationwide have been protesting in regards to criminal justice reform. And it has put a lot of pressure on some of the police reforms here. And I'm grateful that our Board of Supervisors, Nathan Fletcher, has decided to listen and respond quickly and expeditiously to making these changes in the County of San Diego. I am really excited about the initiatives, but the one that really hits home for me, and the story came to my mind when Board of Supervisor Fletcher was just talking, is the one with regard to mental health. I have an older brother who has had mental health challenges his entire life. And for the last 45 years, our family has had to endure trauma and experience dealing with my precious brother. The only option we ever had was when he would have a mental health crisis breakdown was to call PERT. PERT would put him in jail for a few days, then he would be back at our house again. He would be on his meds for a few days, then later on he would have another mental health breakdown, and the only option we ever had was PERT. Call PERT, call PERT. I am excited today that we will have other options for our mentally challenged relatives. That hit home for me as someone who had to deal with my brother and my mom and our brothers and sisters for the last 40 years in that regard. We felt hopeless, helpless, and totally frustrated and traumatized. I am thankful today that the Board of Supervisors is putting forth that particular initiative because it hits home for me personally. I also want to thank Board of Supervisor Fletcher for also putting forth the other initiatives. The Citizens Law Enforcement Advisory Board is very important. Citizens, residents like myself and others, we need a voice. I believe some of the issues with the law enforcement have to do with the fact that they don't hear stories like mine about my brother. They don't hear stories from residents about what's really going on in the streets and in the communities. There's a whole lot of positive things that are going on rather than negative, but they always respond to the negative and not the positive. So this is a long time issue that I am glad Nathan Fletcher has decided to take on. And I would like to admonish the Board of Supervisors on June 23rd, next Tuesday, to stand with Board of Supervisors Nathan Fletcher in a unanimous vote in support of these three important initiatives. Again, I thank you for this time, and I am very, very honored. Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Our next speaker with Pillars of the Community is a man who does incredible work on actual restorative justice and tackling problems. He's someone who, when he calls me, I listen because he will tell you exactly what is happening and exactly what needs to be done. Someone I have tremendous respect for, Khalid Alexander.
You know, the irony of having this press conference in front of this building where Supervisor Fletcher pointed out was the place of peaceful protests less than 2 weeks ago, where we had hundreds of San Diegans who were standing here and demanding that everybody act as if Black Lives Matter, that were demanding the opportunity to breathe, the opportunity to live, demanding that police don't shoot. And what they were met with instead of negotiations, instead of a conversation, instead of questions asking why, were rubber bullets and tear gas that were shot from right up here. And their presence, the presence of peaceful protesters, was immediately displaced by militarized police officers wearing battle gear, wearing helmets, wielding batons, and threatening those people, black people, Latinx people, Chicanx and Chicano people, who were all sitting here to say, hey, listen to us and listen to our voice. And that type of response, that type of violent response has been something to peaceful protesters, has given me a lot of time over the last few days to reflect about the times that we're living in. Because one of the most profound experiences for me has been watching the reaction of people to the violent attacks by the people who were sworn to protect and serve our community. But for me, what was noteworthy wasn't the violence itself. For me, what was noteworthy wasn't the disrespect and the disregard to the lives and to the safety of those protesters. But it was the violence and the people who that violence was being targeted towards. That people who were not used to being hassled by the police, people who were not used to seeing that violent face of the police, unlike people in Southeast San Diego and other communities around the country, who are constantly harassed, who are constantly thrown up against walls, who are constantly slammed against police cars, are constantly searched, and are constantly degraded on a daily basis throughout the year. But seeing the reaction of these people who are not used to that face of police and their response to it, and saying that we cannot continue to live in a society that allows people who are trained to protect and serve, who are supposedly trained to protect and serve, who are supposedly trained to hold weapons, who are supposedly trained to be there for our community, to continue to run rampant and treat anybody who they perceive as the other. Whether that person is black, whether that person is brown, whether that person is a so-called gang member, whether that person is a so-called peaceful protester, as soon as they are viewed as the other, we cannot allow them to use force, we cannot allow them to use violence in order to quell and prevent any type of real and meaningful conversations happen. These proposals that Supervisor Fletcher is giving to the community are not revolutionary. Some people might look at the proposals and demand to find alternatives to policing as radical. They are not. Some people may look at the demand to use mental health experts to deal with mental health issues as radical. It is not. None of the proposals that are being made today are particularly groundbreaking. However, they are an important step in the right direction. They are an important step to get us to a place where real conversations about real change can begin to happen. I wish somebody could explain to me why having trained mental health experts responding to mental health breakdowns is controversial. I wish that somebody can explain to me why they think having police who have relatively no training in mental health issues be the first and only responders to mental health breakdowns. We have to reevaluate our priorities as a community. We have to be able to reevaluate where we put our tax dollars and what directions our tax dollars are being used in. These are common sense proposals, and I hope that the Board of Supervisors and the larger San Diego community recognizes this reality and begins starting a process that will hopefully lead to real and sustainable change. We need to pass this proposal on Tuesday. We need to begin the process of creating a better world and looking at radical ways to change a radically wrong system. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker today from San Diego for Justice Coalition is Marisa Talbert.
Good morning to you all. My name is Marisa Talbert, and I am speaking on behalf of San Diegans for Justice. Today, Juneteenth, is the day that we mark the end of slavery in the United States. Today, the Black community celebrates progress, but stands firm in our conviction that we have not come far enough. We want to thank Supervisor Fletcher for following in the lead of Black organizers, attorneys, community organizations, pastors, and activists who have been working for decades to improve public safety and equity for all San Diegans. We welcome increased transparency and accountability for the San Diego County Sheriff's Department that is closely aligned to our own proposal in the city of San Diego. We are happy to see a realignment of law enforcement duties that will keep some of our most vulnerable populations from being targeted and harassed by brutality. We appreciate that Supervisor Fletcher is following in the lead of Councilmember Monica Montgomery in proposing an office specifically to address systemic racism in all areas of county government and policy. These changes are not enough, but they are a solid foundation upon which we will fundamentally reimagine policing in San Diego County. And we thank Supervisor Fletcher for standing with us. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we're happy to take any questions, and I know all of the folks who spoke and are here are available for one-on-one interviews as well. But if we have any quick questions here, we can take them. Yeah. No, there'll be three separate votes. There are three separate actions that are introduced. I view them as a package, and you know, we don't need half of a step forward. We need a full step forward. So we want to see all three approved. Yeah, briefly. Yeah, so what we're trying to do is tackle issues of oversight by strengthening the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board to provide more independence, more oversight, more authority. We're trying to tackle realignment of funding in moving things that are currently done by law enforcement to mental health clinicians. And we are trying to systematically take a hard look internally at our operations with the creation of an Office of Equity and Racial Justice. Yes? Yeah, no, under jurisdiction. So the city's moving forward with an independent review that would apply to the city of San Diego. The county's authority, legal authority that we have only applies to the Sheriff's Department and Probation Department. And so it would be oversight for sheriff's deputies and probation. No, I haven't seen what they're doing, but I'm happy to take a look at it and see what it is. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, so what we're trying to do, a lot of those tie to San Diego Police Department, which is through the city, we have to do. What we're trying to do is do everything we can in the position we are in providing greater oversight, and in particular, having that Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board have the authority to automatically review every time there's a discharge of a weapon, every time there's a use of force that creates great bodily injury, every time there's any use of force associated with the protest or First Amendment activity, and then what they already do is review every time there's an in-custody death. So we're trying to provide greater oversight and transparency in terms of what's happening. Yes, sir. All right, thank you all, and I know folks are here available for individual interviews, so thank you.